Welcome everyone who's here and at home who's watching. This is the Gambit Division 2 open seat debate. I'm John Stanton, I'm the editor of the Gambit. Thank you all for coming and attending. I want to thank the candidates and my colleagues for all being here. I want to run through just a couple of quick basic rules before we get started here. Answers are going to be for 1 minute, and then the candidates will be given told when you're about 30 seconds and about 15 seconds, and then to stop. I'm a Catholic, so I believe in a little bit of grace, so I'll let you guys go maybe a little bit long, but I also was paid cash money to throw people down the steps at a punk rock club, so don't go too long. Also, you know, love to keep it civil. I put pants on for this, so let's act like adults tonight. And I want to really quickly thank the Solution Journalism's Network, who we've been working with all year long on a housing project to look at affordability issues surrounding housing and to try to find new ways to be able to solve the problems and not just sort of talk about the problems. And they have helped on tonight. And I would like you all to keep that in mind and ideas about actually offering solutions as opposed to just sort of talking about broad sort of platitudes. That is possible. Let me introduce first our panel. We have Stephanie Grace from the Advocate times-picayune, Clancy DeBose from Gambit, of course, and Sharice Gibson from WWL. They will be asking all the questions. We have a series of topics that they will be asking on over the next hour or so. And then, of course, we have our candidates. We have J.P. Morrell, Bart Everson, and Kristen Gislin Palmer. And they will be doing all the answering, so you can send all of your negativity towards them later. I think to open up, we decided that instead of asking for your traditional sort of opening statements, which are kind of boring, to ask instead if you could each provide us with one sort of either thing that you've done on the council or a remarkable thing you would like to be able to do in the council if you are elected. And we give you a minute here to do that. So, Councilwoman, if you'd like to start.
Sure. I'm sorry, one thing that I've already done on the council or one thing that I want to do when I'm on the council?
Either.
Well, I think I'll keep it within the housing theme since you kind of brought that up. You know, my background is in housing and affordability, and I really think we do need to find different ways of doing it. And I've been working right now with City Planning Commission to really look at our zoning issues and how sometimes zoning can actually disincentivize the production of housing. And that's one thing that I've been working very closely with them on. I've started the process with looking at the ability to produce units from 1 to 9 as a source of, but can be done administratively instead of going through a conditional use process if they've already done that historically. And so I think a lot of the incentives are for larger full-scale developments as opposed to smaller ones that fit within the community and also afford more opportunities in our cityscape.
I'm not a professor. A lot of times I say I play one on TV. But there's many things I would like to do on the city council. I think the thing that's come to the top for me has been boosting up our public transit system. I got in this race specifically because I'm concerned about climate change, you know, the climate crisis, global warming, as we used to call it. And one of the main things that we do to contribute to the pollution that causes global warming is when we move people and goods around. We do it in a way that puts a lot of carbon into the atmosphere and contributes to this problem. Public transit is much more sustainable. Our public transit system has never really been great in this city. It could be a lot better. We need to radically boost it up, radically improve it. So I would like to see the city council champion a new millage to bring it up to a higher level, particularly serving our lower income communities so that people can get to their jobs and tie it in with affordable housing as well.
The New Orleans City Council is very unique in that it is the only city council in the state of Louisiana that has utility regulatory authority. And it's authority that's sadly gone mostly unused as far as the city is concerned. Energy bills are simply too high, and the council has the unique ability to both raise and lower rates, and yet historically has continued to raise rates. Additionally, when you look at the interaction with Sewage and Water Board, or for those of you who are trying to stream this right now, Cox Cable, those are also utilities that the council regulates and does not regulate well. So as the next council member at large, one of my primary goals would be to reassert the council's regulatory authority and become an active regulator again that does not simply solve problems by passing costs on to ratepayers.
Okay, so? Nope. Gotcha. So we should address the elephant in the room, I think, here. As we all know, Council Member Brosette was arrested on Monday. And Councilwoman Palmer, first, I guess to you, given the fact that he is facing his third DWI arrest right now, possibly jail time with that, do you think that the councilman should step down from his seat on the council and formally end his campaign? And if not, do you still sort of stand by the sort of endorsement agreement that you guys had come up with last week?
Well, first off, I want to be very clear, I stand by Councilmember said as a man. I think he's going through a very difficult time right now, and I'm not going to sit here and make a statement, a blatant statement at this point. I do feel that he has to release a statement, and he is going through a process that is very difficult. I think anybody that has had a family member or a friend that has addiction issues know how difficult that can be. I know I lost my nephew to a heroin overdose, and I've seen that whole cycle of coming in and out. And so I do think it's important to give him a little space while he's determining what his statement will be, and I will make mine afterward.
Well, after the previous arrest in 2020, you and other folks had sort of said that it was important for him, obviously, to get treatment, but that also he had to sort of have some accountability around that. Do you think that he did?
Yes, I mean, I have to take him obviously at face value. He wrote a very long letter to, I think, each of the council members that outlined what he did in terms of restitution. I think all of you know that he worked with the district attorney to do that. He also, went to pay for the vehicle. In addition to that, he had to go through counseling, and it was my understanding that he did that and that he was currently under counseling. So yes, I take him at his word, and that's where he was. And quite frankly, from what I've witnessed on the council, since that incident, he has been very present. He has worked very hard. We have worked together on some transformative, some progressive legislation, and so his work ethic was there.
JP, the question to you is do you think that the councilman should step down from his seat on the council and formally end his campaign?
Well, I think I can say definitively, I've probably known Jared more than anyone up here, as far as length of time. Many of you know that he started off as a staffer in my mom's office when she was on the council. I know that everyone in the city has dealt with friends and relatives who struggle with addiction. My Uncle Randy came back from Vietnam addicted to drugs and spent his entire life in and out of rehab. So I think at this time, really, I think Jared needs to do what's best for himself. And I think that there's a lot of pressure involved in the campaign process, but I think he's taking the space, he's taking the time to begin that process, and like I said, I think he needs to do what's best for himself at this point, as far as a campaign. As far as whether or not he's going to stay on the council, I think that's really a matter for his council colleagues to decide.
Same question.
Well, I certainly don't know Jared Brosette as well. I've gotten to know him a little bit on the campaign trail, and I've been impressed by his passion for social justice issues. I particularly think that this incident, as unfortunate and sad as it is, touches on two important things that I've already been talking about at these forums relating to alcohol and automobiles. The first is, the way we've chosen to deal. Alcohol is a dangerous drug, maybe one of the most dangerous drugs there is. The way we've chosen to deal with that in society is to make it legal and to say that it's going to be regulated to an extent. There's going to be consequences for abusing it. And I think we should do that with all substances, all drugs. Take money out of organized crime and focus on treatment instead, because it's a public health issue. And this is something that I've been talking about at campaign events. What are you going to do about violence? What are you going to do about crime? But what doesn't get talked about as much is automobiles. I talked earlier about public transit. I'm not going to say that's going to solve all our problems, but if we had a robust public transit system, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Well, this is going to be where I bow out more or less from this evening. The first issue that we're going to talk about is housing and homelessness. And I think I'll kick it to Clancy to start us off.
Okay, and we're going to rotate the who goes first with each question. So all of you will get a chance to go first, middle, and last. So this first question will go first to former Senator Morrell. What have you done to improve and increase affordable housing in the past few years? And what steps can the council take to address the lack of affordable housing in this city? It's the same question for all three of you. JP, you go first, and then Kristen, and then Bart. And we're going to go that way.
Well, as a senator, there are two things that I was very proud of that we did dealing with housing in particular. One, the Louisiana Housing Finance Authority has always never given New Orleans its fair share of resources to develop large-scale affordable housing. As a member of the Bond Commission, I led an effort to have a lot of very heated public conversations about the lack of interest in supporting affordable housing on a larger scale in the city of New Orleans. As a senator also, I defended on multiple occasions the city council's inclusionary housing ordinance, which Conrad Appel filed several bills almost on an annual basis to get rid of. I'm very concerned about it because it's largely been on life support because the governor has vetoed bills to remove that, but it's more than likely we will have a next Republican governor. So as a council member, I've got a very detailed plan on that that will take longer than a minute.
Thank you. So my background, as many of you know, is in affordable housing. I've worked in affordable housing for 20 years plus. I know intimately the issues that surround housing. I'm one of the founding members of GNOHA, the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance. I continue to work with them in terms of policy and enacting it. When I came back onto the council, when I was on the council the first time, I made sure we had disaster CDBG dollars. I worked with Jericho Road to get soft second money, over $72 million, and that program was one of the most successful programs in terms of creating more housing, especially home ownership, where we lost 10 percentage points of black home ownership after Katrina. When I came back on the council, one of the first things I did was put back affordable housing requirements in the riverfront overlay. That was ripped out by the previous council. In addition to that, I have put forward the NIF fund, the Neighborhood Improvement Fund. And when I did this STR laws, I put a per night fee that goes into the NIF fund, which is meant to incentivize more affordable housing. So everything I do when we look at legislation, I do how can we do it to incentivize more. Thank you.
Well, of course, I'm the only person up here who hasn't held public office, so I can tell you more about my philosophy, what I think the city needs. We're facing steep gentrification in our neighborhoods. Everybody's shocked at how much housing costs. So affordable housing is obviously needed more than ever, and we have to have strong affordable housing policies. I really don't like a market-driven approach. I don't like a big government approach, and I don't like using tax incentives to provide a small percentage of affordable housing that then disappears after a certain period of time. What I really do like, the model I favor, is this idea of a community land trust, which is invented here in the South, has gained some ground here in New Orleans in recent years, and the Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative is a great example of this. They created what they called the first permanent affordable housing in New Orleans just a couple years ago. We need to foster strong communities that have community land trusts.
All right, we'll do this next question for Councilwoman Palmer. You talked a little bit earlier about short-term rental, the short-term rental ordinance. I have to ask you this question. Is the current short-term rental ordinance working? And if not, how would you revise it?
So the law is an excellent law in terms that it upheld major court challenges, and you can imagine, international company. And in fact, other municipalities have actually taken it and used a lot of it. It's supposed to be a simple law. The issues that we have right now, the current, and we're not going to know. We're not going to know if it's a great law or not, quite frankly, because I do not feel that it has been enforced by the administration to the degree that it should be. You know, this process was over 1.5 years long. We worked with many different community members throughout in order to come there. I think one of the problems that we see right now is the enforcement piece, right? The main problem we see within all of the issues is the whole house short-term rentals. And that is where we're not having an issue with the administration shutting them down. So we've actually passed another law to increase the fines and the fees to go directly to enforcement, in addition to hiring additional lawyers for enforcement. Now I've also brought in the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, which is a third party, to assess it, and he has actually uncovered a lot more illegal short-term rentals, and I think that's a really good process to have a third party come in to hold the administration accountable.
Short-term rentals are clearly a problem in our city. I think a lot of people have noted that neighborhoods are being transformed, and not in positive ways. It's contributing to gentrification. I do agree that enforcement of the existing law is obviously a problem. But as far as what the city council can do, I favor an approach of allowing short-term rentals only for people with a homestead exemption. And this would, you know, I have no problem with the idea of somebody renting out the other half of their double as a short-term rental. It's the absentee landlords that are really problematic in my view.
And former Senator Morrell.
Thank you. This is a really important issue, and I'll be candid. The current short-term rental law is a complete joke. When the current council most recently did their most significant amendment, when they cherry-picked gentrified areas in the city, such as the Lower Garden District and French Quarter, to ban short-term rentals, it was foreseeable and happened almost immediately that it created tremendous short-term rentals in the Tremé, Marigny, and Bywater. The once well-populated by locals, historic Tremé is now so proliferated with short-term rentals. I have families moving out just because their kids have no friends. The short-term rental law needs to be thrown out and done over completely, and most importantly because the penalties are so ridiculously loose that all it would take to keep an illegal short-term rental on the books was simply create a new LLC and transfer the property.
Well, I would like to respond because a lot of this is not based in fact, what he's saying. The reality is, and Tremé is an interesting situation, but we also have to realize that short-term rentals were never legal in the French Quarter. So to say that making them illegal pushes out in Tremé is not a fair statement. They've always been illegal. To also say that a short-term rental and this law is based on zoning, right? It's not based on whether a neighborhood is gentrified or not. So the premise is that if a house is a residential home, it should not have a commercial use, right? And so it follows the zoning. And so the only place you can have a commercial short-term rental will be in a commercially zoned area. The problem is a proliferation of illegal short-term rentals that are not being enforced. And I appreciate Mr. Brown wanting to throw it all out. This was an incredibly long process. And I really think that people want to throw it out so that they can have rampant short-term rentals throughout the city. And so until we sit here and decide whether or not this is working, let's have a city that actually enforces the current law.
Thank you. Good evening, and let's start with Mr. Everson on this. What steps can the council take to reduce homelessness? And what, if anything, have you done to address the problem in the last 10 years? Mr. Everson.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay.
I believe that affordable housing is part of the solution, but we need ways of housing people who have mental health issues. And it's been clear, I think it first came to my attention after Katrina, that the mental health services in the whole state of Louisiana are severely lacking. So I believe what the council has to do is to beef up the mental health services that are available to our people, including treatment for, as we mentioned earlier, people with substance abuse issues.
Okay. Mr. Morell.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. So, in my time in the legislature, one of the greatest achievements we had after we were able to get past Governor Bob Jindal with Governor Edwards was the immediate expansion of the Affordable Care Act. When you look at one of the root causes of homelessness, it is obviously mental health. There are a lot of people who find themselves in crisis and often find themselves on the street. So we expanded the Affordable Care Act to the state level, and we have worked diligently with groups like the Metropolitan Health Services District to try and provide resources to those people who are in crisis on the street, because oftentimes, if you can get them with resources, other resources become available, such as not just treatment, but housing itself. The other issue, obviously, is the gentrification and housing affordability. There are people on the street because with the proliferation of short-term rentals and the conversion of apartments to short-term rentals, they simply had no place to live. So that is an affordable housing issue and one that I would tackle on the council.
Councilmember Palmer. Thank you. Actually, the number one issue for homelessness is unaffordable housing. 40% of the entire country's homeless live in California, and there's a definite correlation there between unaffordability and homeless. In order to truly stop homelessness, you need to prevent it before it occurs, right? That's why there are a lot of programs that you to have interruption programs and really work with them and a really great example of that is like rental subsidies, right? And so the NIF fund that I authored to continue and also beefed up through fines and fees actually prevented a significant amount of homelessness during this whole COVID situation by doing that emergency rental assistance. Emergency rental assistance programs are the number one way of preventing homelessness. Also on the council this term, I've been one of the leaders in making sure we have the low barrier shelter, which is really important. It's 100 beds. I'm guaranteeing when I come back is at large. We want to increase it by another 200 beds. Again, to also provide wraparound services there. Thank you.
This next question segues into the general area of crime and the NOPD. And this question goes first to Senator Morell, former Senator Morell. New Orleanians have been supportive of efforts to reform the criminal justice system, but they're also currently very scared because of the rise in violent crime. What will you do to strike the right balance between criminal justice reform and public safety?
Well, I think that the two things are not necessarily in opposition. For those of us who have been reformers, and I've been a reformer my entire time in office, I started as a public defender, reform is about fairness. So having fundamental fairness is not in opposition to solving and preventing crime. I think part of the issue is that the council has to deal with the NOPD with a sense of urgency. For those of you who've lived in New Orleans for a very long time, you remember that Richard Pennington did not fall from the sky. The city council had a showdown with Mark Morial over the NOPD budget, which led to his hiring. The council has never stepped up using its budgetary powers to engage the NOPD on alternative solutions, such as returning the Tiger Unit, which was wildly successful in preventing carjackings and armed robberies throughout the city of New Orleans. It was ended last year in September, and directly after it was discontinued, those crimes went up 150%. The council has a dashboard to track what crime is happening in the city. They should have noticed it, and they should have responded. And as your council member, I will directly engage NOPD to find solutions.
Kristen?
Sure, thank you. So I actually agree with Senator J.P. Morell that it's not exclusive, criminal justice reform and keeping the city safe. You know, my first term, I do not come from a criminal justice background, but I worked very closely with the Vera Institute. I'm the only person left standing that actually voted to reduce the jail size. When I came into office, it was over 3,000. Now it's around 800. I am a staunch, not an advocate, I guess we could say, to have a phase 3 of the jail. I think it would create $7 to $8 million additional, which could go to more prevention of crime. We need to focus very clearly on violent crime. And we all know a minority of folks create the majority of the crime. And we have to really spend more time focusing on the forensics and on our crime lab to link these crimes. I've started a bill on that. We're actually going to pass some to increase crime lab coming up this budgetary season, as well as folks like our crime scene techs and our ballistics and our DNA. We have to be able to link crime to solve crime, because right now our solve record is abysmally low.
You know, for my entire life, I've seen that we've just fiddled with the same basic criminal justice system. We've just fiddled with some of the ways that we do this or that. And the result, predictably, has been minor fluctuations. The crime rate goes up, crime rate goes down. But even in the best of times, it's not great. So I believe that if we want radical change in our society, we have to make radical changes. We have to try doing something radically different. I suggest that we implement a universal basic income. This is usually discussed at the federal level, but there's been a number of municipalities that have experimented with it, and somebody mentioned being Catholic. I hear there's a lot of Catholics in New Orleans. Pope Francis has come out in favor of the universal basic income. So let's get rid of poverty, eliminate it directly through that method. Legalize all drugs and get the money out of organized crime, focus on public health treatment instead, and finally, invest fully in education, the most radical thing of all.
All right, this next question continues in our theme of crime and NOPD, beginning with Kristen. A question for you, a big conversation happening, of course, with the consent decree. Is NOPD ready to come out of the consent decree? Why or why not?
I would love for them to be ready to come out of the consent decree, because I would like to see those millions of dollars invested in other places, right? I think our budget's upside down when we talk about how much we're putting in our criminal justice system, and the product is not good. I will tell you, I'm very concerned with the article that came out on Sunday in terms of PIB not holding the police accountable for details. And it looks like we're taking a step backwards, and I think that needs to be fully investigated, because I don't understand why some police officers can be making close to $200,000 a year, while others are leaving the force because they can't afford to stay on, and they don't want to work those extra details and whatnot. So I do think that there's some issues that need to be rectified before we go.
Ms. Morrell?
I don't think the NOPD is ready yet. We are one of the few cities in the entire nation that has an Office of Police Monitor, which is basically the Inspector General for the police department. And in my time at the legislature, I filed a tremendous amount of bills to expand the powers of the Office of Police Monitor. In fact, the story that came out Sunday, the bill that I passed that made OPSEs, all of their communications, public record, is why that story was even able to happen. I think that Office of Police Monitor really would be the authority to replace the monitor should it leave, but I don't think that there's been an effort to beef up that office to be a substitute monitor should the monitor leave. So until the monitors are able to demonstrate that Office of Police Monitor can fill that role, I don't think it's ready for NOPD to lead the consent decree.
Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Everson and then give anyone an opportunity to offer a rebuttal. Mr. Everson.
All right. Thank you. No, I don't believe that the NOPD is ready to leave the consent decree. I think we have to be very cautious about that because of the long history. And we'll know when the time comes when everybody in the city says, oh yeah, things are great. Then we'll know that it's time for the NOPD to leave the consent decree, and we can allocate resources accordingly.
I'm not so sure. I don't quite understand what the senator is talking about, what he authored, because I also know that he authored a bill that would have put all the taxpayers on the hook for payroll fraud that's being perpetrated by NOPD officers right now in terms of the pension. So that to me is a big issue. And quite frankly, the only reason why PIB is not working is all of that was a public records request. It was not a formulaic thing. And I do think PIB right now should have senior officers rotating through like every other PIB instead of having the same officers on the staff repeatedly.
I
respond?
think that's the problem when you read a news story and don't actually read the news story. Act 93 of 2013, which is the bill that was referenced in it, it began as a bill that dealt with a taxation issue. When they switched to Office of Police and Secondary Employment, officers previously, under the old detailed process, were independent contractors. When they became under the Office of Police and Secondary Employment, they turned into additional salaried workers, and there was a concern where if you're pulling taxation from the federal and state level out of details, does that create a retirement obligation? The city couldn't figure out what it wanted to do with it, so working with Susan Hudson, the Office of Police Monitor, we amended that bill into the bill that became, and the bill that actually passed, that expanded the Office of Police Monitor, that created the position that all records that are created by Office of Police and Secondary Employment are now public records that can be found through public records requests. The requests that were found on the basis of the article could only have happened because the bill made all those records a public record. So if you actually research stories rather than just parodying them, you would have found that.
Thank you. Staying on the same topic and starting with Mr. Everson this time, what do you think is the right number of cops for New Orleans, and how would you pay for them?
Oh, that's a tough question. In 2007, a friend of mine was murdered in her home, and I ended up giving a speech at City Hall with a few other community people in front of thousands of people. And as part of that speech, I was pretty angry and upset. But I stand by everything that I said except for one thing. And the one thing I said that was a little bit off is I said that we needed more cops. That one phrase, I think, was a mistake, because it's not a matter of the number of police that we had necessarily. It was a matter of how those police are deployed, and moreover, what other services are lacking. So I strongly support the idea of having as few police as possible and allocating more resources where they're completely lacking.
Okay. Councilmember Palmer.
Sure, thank you. And excuse me, I did read it. Please don't mansplain me that. The intent was very clear in what you initially introduced. So when we talk about the police, I also think we have to talk about how we can add to it in a more sustainable way. And one of the things that the council is working on, I'm working on, is really having mental health interrupters, which, as we know, last year alone, there were over 6,000 calls of service for mental health. And I think it's really important, the police don't need to respond to that. It can just escalate. In other cities where you have mental health interrupters, they're trained social workers and also trained in conflict resolution. And I think that's a smart use of funds. I also, like I mentioned before, we need to have civilians doing work that the cops should not do. When we talk about crime scene techs, when we talk about ballistics, when we talk about DNA, if we ran those departments efficiently, we wouldn't need as many police that we do require, right? But I would say around 1,400, quite frankly. Because we also need to take into account, and I want to say this, we're more than a city of just 400,000. We're a city that expands and contracts with a very large tourist base.
Right. Okay. Senator Morrell.
Thank you. So the number that's often cited by people in regards to the NOPD and the ideal number is somewhere between 1,400 and 1,600 officers. That's typically cited because that's what the number was in the 1990s when Pennington was here. If you adjust that number based on our current population, it's actually around 1,250. But I think we're too focused on the number because nationally there's a shortage of police officers. And simply put, we have a lateral hiring problem in New Orleans. For those of you who don't know, we're the only city in the entire state of Louisiana that if we want to recruit a tremendous, great officer from another city, let's say there's a captain in Philadelphia who would be a great fit for the NOPD, if the NOPD tried to recruit him, he'd have to start over as a recruit. On the alternative, everyone can poach NOPD officers and give them a promotion or a rank or a bonus. We have 54 officers that left through June of this year, and we've picked up, at best, 35. We're at negative 19 officers. Until we stop the bleeding at the NOPD, until we stabilize the NOPD it's hard to have a conversation about growing the department to some number that we're never going to hit. We need to get in the role of just stabilizing it where it is
Okay,
to start.
thank you.
This next question segues to the next topic, which is regulation of Entergy. And it goes first to former Senator Morrell. Right now, Entergy and the council are lobbying Congress for money to cover E&O's storm-related costs from Ida, as happened after Katrina, which requires a waiver for use of CDBG monies. But this time, unlike last time, there is deep bipartisan opposition to that idea. If the feds provide no money for those costs, and that's the predicate of this question, if the feds provide no money, will you vote to allow Entergy to recover those costs over time from ratepayers, as normally happens with other utilities?
Well, I think what's been lacking with Entergy in regards to all of the infrastructure costs it passed on ratepayers is that we simply don't get good deals. The council recently passed a deal with Entergy regarding a sewage and water board power plant where we are paying Entergy back $25 million. We're paying them back $75 million. I think that if the council were better stewards of negotiating those deals and making the interest rates even match what municipally is available, the council's job is to negotiate those rates as low as possible. And if we could get those rates to a reasonable level that was competitive, if Entergy could prove in detail what numbers were actually necessary, then at some point we're going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for that. But we're not there yet, because historically that relationship has been whatever number Entergy makes up, the council pays it, and that needs to stop.
Yeah, so no, I'm absolutely opposed to it. I've said from the beginning, you know, Entergy still has not put out what the reimbursement, their quote unquote reimbursement for Zeta. So we don't even know what that is going to look like. And I'm not sure that the council has done a good job in regulating. I do not sit on the Utilities Committee. That does not abdicate me from any responsibility. I want to be very clear. But I've not been impressed with what the leadership of the Utilities Committee has done in the past 16, 18 years. I do think that we have to hold them more accountable. I think we need to build up the Curio office. And I think the Curio office needs to be, which is the Council Utility Regulatory, and it needs to really be more public-facing than it is now. I think it's more of an advisory role, and I think the council really should use it more public-facing so that we can get more information. It's a two-way street.
I got in this race for one reason, and that was to draw attention to the urgent need for action on the climate crisis. How does that translate into local policy? The number one thing that it kept coming back to again and again was our energy issues, and Entergy New Orleans in particular. The council does have this unique regulatory authority. Only Washington, D.C. and New Orleans have this kind of authority. Well, but the problem is that Entergy is this really profitable company. So what we've seen with the city council is an example of regulatory capture, where Entergy has its way all the time. We have to draw the line somewhere, and this is as good a place as any to draw it. No, you can't pass those costs along to the ratepayers. We have to hold the line, and right now, we have to really look at, I think everything has to be on the table regarding the entire structure and relationship with Entergy.
There's a follow-up to that, since at least two of you explicitly said, and JP, you kind of inferred that you would not let them recover costs. So if you're not going to let them, Entergy recover the costs, what precedent can you cite for disallowing storm recovery costs, and where, other than the federal government, would that money come from?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and I think we're going to have to cross that bridge. I hate to say it, but when we come to it, I think, you know, when you look at other types of a structure for utilities, if there is some type of also public ownership, I'm not saying 100%, but that also sets you up for having the ability to recapture costs from FEMA. And I think that's something that we need to look at, because we have not, Entergy's not done a good job in terms of hardening the system. If there is a way that could be a quasi public benefit within Entergy, it really set us up to actually get more federal dollars to do the type of infrastructure that we need over longer periods of time, and that it would be more thoughtful.
Precedent, I think we establish the precedent by building political will within the city. The council is to represent the people and to shape the policy and the law of the city. So we establish that precedent by saying this is what serves the common good. I think that the council just needs to flex that a little more.
Well, to give some clarity to what I said, I think the issue is that whenever we have an infrastructure issue that even sort of impacts energy, by default, we ask our buddies at Entergy, how much can you give us and we'll pay you back at whatever rate you want. There's no reason why, as a council, we could not shop to other infrastructure management companies, hedge funds, and the like across the country to find alternative mechanisms to fund it at a cheaper rate. My position is we have historically not gotten a good deal when we use Entergy as our bank to do infrastructure improvements. And I think that we need to have a willingness as a city council to go anywhere we have to get the lowest rate possible, because the primary job of a regulator is to be a good fiduciary agent of the people it represents. And the council has not been, and by that I mean the entire council, because they all vote on rate increases, have not been good fiduciary agents.
Well, thank you so much for your responses. We move on to our quality of life and general section. I'll begin with Mr. Everson with this question. Polls show that citizens have very low confidence in City Hall's functionality. In fact, many people believe city government is broken or it's dysfunctional. What should the council be doing to restore people's faith in the functionality of the city? You have 1 minute.
I think the first thing that the city council needs to do is to declare a climate emergency. Currently, humanity, the entire world, is facing an existential threat in the form of climate change. The lack of action, the lack of even talking about it in our city government indicates to me that we're out of touch. If we want to restore people's faith in city government, we have to show that we're cognizant of the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, the climate crisis. If we don't prioritize this and take action immediately, we know that New Orleans is one of the most vulnerable cities in the world to climate change. So New Orleans really should be at the forefront of meeting this challenge.
Okay, let's go to Senator Morrell.
Well, I think when I talk to people across the city, the citizens of the city, they have such low expectations of what the city and the city council and what government will do, they just assume everything is going to stay broken. I think the first thing you have to do to restore confidence in the citizens that government will actually care is that you have to really, as a council, go through each department piece by piece. You have to go into the budget process and not make it an annual process. It needs to be an annual budget with monthly meetings tracking every individual department where individual citizens can come up and explain what their experience has been, and we need to budget for outcomes. Right now, the budget process is not transparent. It's annual. There are no significant meetings monthly where people are able to explain how safety and permits utterly fails at its job, and there's no accountability and no sense of urgency. As the next councilman at large, I hear your problems. I've picked up some of your problems, and I understand that the sense of urgency is what's lacking, and I will tackle these problems that have not been tackled in 8 years. Thank you.
Councilwoman Palmer.
Thank you so much. So, you know, we have hit a crisis point. I think it has gotten worse. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. I think we also look at it's what happened over COVID as well. I mean, let's not forget, we've had 15 months of COVID where we had to significantly cut the resources at City Hall. The administration has had to do that. Trust me, I came in an administration in 2010 where we had a $70 million budget shortfall that we had to actually take a lot of furloughs and had to figure out how to do it, and we did it. We did it in a couple of years, and I think we understand what is going on right now, which is why I've been very aggressive in making sure the American Recovery Act dollars are going to departments that can really be responsive to our citizens. And now we're talking about safety and permits, we're talking about City Planning Commission, and so those are actually what we dealt with yesterday. We're ensuring that the money is being beefed up in both of those departments so they can immediately start addressing. And I also think that 311 needs to be a little bit more retooled so that it's a two-way street, right? Right now there's a reporting that happens within 311, but there's not a reporting back to the constituent on where that process is.
Thank you, and let's start with Senator Morell on this. I just got a mailer from you on this topic. The city has privatized trash collection for decades now. With trash piling up in many parts of town and service reduced to 1 day a week, has privatization been a failure, or is this a matter of one company failing?
I think privatization as a whole has been a failure for several reasons. The first is many of you don't realize the $24 you're charged on sanitation, that doesn't go to the contractor. A portion of that goes to the contractor, the rest goes to the city. So the privatization of this service, like many, was a profit-driven move by the city of New Orleans to do something cheaper and disinvest themselves of it. These hoppers have been on strike since May 20th of 2020. Honestly, the fact the wheels came off that truck during Ida, it's kind of impressive it didn't come off sooner. The city does not treat these issues with a sense of urgency. The council and the mayor should have gotten in the middle of this issue when these people who are being treated so badly unionized, and there should have been an effort to resolve this 18 months ago, and that failure of leadership could have happened even if it was a public utility, because when people unionize, there's two ways to deal with it. You can work with them where they are, or you can ignore they exist. And these contractors in the city and city council ignored they existed.
Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. So I might have a little different take on this because my district actually has all three trash contractors working in it. So I've gotten to see it pretty intimately from a different perspective, right, on what's working and what's not working. And we have a major issue with one of the contractors. I want to be very clear. So no, we don't have to throw out the whole system. But Metro did not do a good job. They haven't done a good job in quite a while. I'm the only council member that has held them accountable. Thank you very much. And I did it through pure data by tracking back to January 1, where there were over 12,000 complaints of non-pickup just with Metro alone, which was 3 times higher than the next one. So before we throw out everything, let's look at that. And I also think competition is good. I also am not going to sit here and defend a contract that was written by a previous administration. I will say when we talk about $15 an hour, this council that passed that livable wage, plus ensuring that all subcontractors will have to do it. So when this contract is bid out, we will ensure that this will not happen again. Okay. Also, I think we should have smaller service delivery. I'm sorry, I could go on about trash.
Mr. Everson.
Does anybody remember what Dr. Martin Luther King was doing when he was assassinated? He was working with the garbage collectors who were on strike in Memphis, Tennessee. The picking up garbage is kind of a difficult job, a thankless job, and I think it's indicative of our society's kind of messed up values when you look at how we treat people who do jobs like that. We need to do better. That much is clear. Now, generally speaking, I'm opposed to privatization. I don't think it's working. The profit-driven model doesn't seem to be working that well with Entergy. Doesn't seem to be working that well with garbage. Doesn't seem to be working that well with outsourced janitorial services. I'm just kind of generally philosophically opposed to that principle. So I would say we should end the privatization of the garbage pickup.
This next question goes to Councilmember Palmer. Where should City Hall be located, and what should happen to the municipal auditorium, and how would you pay for both of those ideas?
Okay, so I think we need to have a municipal buildings commission. I've said this to the past 2 administrations. We have to look in its entirety of all the big public buildings that we own and figure out how to reuse them in more of a master plan way. Definitely at municipal auditorium, it should not be City Hall. We know my stance on that. I led it. There was nobody else behind me. When we did it, now everybody else kind of jumped on that bandwagon. But I want to be very clear, with the municipal auditorium, it should be a cultural institution. That is what the community wants, that's what the greater community wants. And we need to make sure that we can get those FEMA dollars that are set aside for that to help it. But we're still going to need to use historic tax credits and other ways of creating that issue, but it needs to be master planned with the entire park and it's for that by the community and the greater community. In terms of City Hall, like I said, I think a Municipal Buildings Commission is needed. I also think we should look at where we are now. You can still use historic tax credits for that. I think financing is really key in any decision that we make as a city and as a community, because we don't want to just throw bond dollars, right, at this. And if we can use existing properties that we already have, I'm sorry, I'm running over time, but I love talking about buildings, and we can talk about buildings all day.
In this campaign, I've heard a lot from people in New Orleans East and how they feel cut off from the city, how they feel neglected. And one of the proposals that really caught my attention was the idea of, well, what if we put this City Hall in New Orleans East? I think that that is an idea with some merit that really deserves attention. Wherever City Hall is located, I mean, it should go somewhere where the residents actually want it and welcome it and approve of the idea. It should be a community-driven process. And however it's built, it has to be done in a way where we prioritize sustainability and energy efficiency in that new facility or retrofitting an old facility. It needs to be a model for what the future of New Orleans has to be, the greenest and cleanest possible City Hall.
City Hall should not be in Tremé. Tremé has suffered enough under the gentrification that has poisoned it over the last 4 years. And I am the only candidate up here who marched with the people from Municipal Auditorium to City Hall on the day in which we marched against it being moved. To be clear, the council has not actually ended that conversation. What they currently have passed is an interim zoning district which expires after the election. So let's be clear, that is still part of the conversation despite what anyone says. City Hall should not be in Tremé. Municipal Auditorium can be redone as a cultural center with a combination of FEMA dollars and historical tax credits. As far as where City Hall should go, why should it move? The reality is Benson Tower's across the street and it's half empty and owned by the state and the Saints. There's no reason why we couldn't temporarily move City Hall across the street and just fix where City Hall is. There are just a lot of developers that would like that property for something else, and that's why it's not been part of the conversation.
All right, we continue with quality of life in general. This next question is, of course, about civil service. Civil service was adopted in the 1950s, and many say it's now a hindrance to change in our city. What changes, if any, would you make to civil service? And we begin with Mr. Everson.
I'm sorry. I think that a lot of times in these candidate forums, there's an expectation that if you don't know the answer, you make something up. And in this case, I just can't do it. I have absolutely no idea that there's a problem with civil service. I would have to study the issue. I would have to go to school and learn more about it. I'm sorry, that's the best I can do.
There are a couple of things I changed. First, civil service as a whole needs to be more responsive. When you look at things of the lateral hiring issue I brought up previously, where you can't hire officers from outside the state, it's actually a civil service rule. And it's really an archaic protectionist measure that was done years ago so that cops can only be grown in-house. But if you talk to people in law enforcement, they're desperate for more officers to come in, and they want this abolished. And civil service has never moved on it because no one's gotten on the soapbox and picked the fight. So civil service has to be more responsive to where the city's at. I think there needs to be more flexibility in hiring. Currently, part of the reason why we have departments unfilled is that many people who want to go into city government who are young do not want to go into a life job. They don't want to go into a job that pays little where there's a huge retirement. They want to get paid a reasonable rate with the flexibility to leave. Civil service largely prohibits that in the way it sets up the pay scales. I think there's a lot of reform in civil service we could do, and I think that we can do that while maintaining the two clear principles. One, which is to keep politics out of hiring, and two, which is to foster appropriate competition from those within the departments.
Yeah, this one's a bear. I kind of agree a little bit with Bart because sometimes I'm at a loss as well. And trust me, that's even across me from the dais, and I'm trying to have a conversation with them about what their reasoning is. A lot of the structure of it is wrong. I think, again, what I would like to see them held more accountable to are the postings. Right now, there is no accountability in terms of when a job is defined to when a job is posted to when people put in their resumes. There's nothing holding any step of this accountable. So people often might put in, a resume, an application for a particular job, and wind up waiting for months and months. And so I think that has to be part of that. I also think, though, quite frankly, that we have a lot of our city employees were not being paid. And we're not going to have a responsive workforce if we're not paying them what they should be, what they're worth, which is why we offered, myself and Councilmember Brissette offered the $15 an hour. We had so many employees making $7, $8. I think that's also going to go a long way.
Okay. Thank you. And this is the last of the 1-minute questions before we move on to the lightning round. And it's a topic we've talked about many times before. We'll start with Senator Morell. How can we improve the Sewage and Water Board's performance? And is privatization a possible solution?
Privatization is not a solution. At the state level, we've seen privatization across municipal water systems, and it always ends in disaster. In fact, I remember meeting with some of my colleagues from the areas around Lafayette where their water was yellow and smelled like sulfur, and under their privatization contract, it was drinkable, so it was accessible. Privatization is not the solution, but as a legislator, I filed 2 bills to reform the Sewage and Water Board, and neither stuck. So part of the reason why I'm running for the council is that reform on the state level was not successful, so reform on the local level is necessary. Sewage and Water Board needs to be brought to heel within city government. Right now, it's a standalone quasi-state governmental agency, and it's not accountable to the city council or the citizens. And one of the things I would definitely do, it's in my infrastructure plan, is to work with the legislature to make Sewage and Water Board accountable to the council, who hears all of the complaints from our constituents, especially when it comes to billing.
So the single shareholder of the Sewage and Water Board is the mayor. It's not the council. If you want to change that, you have to change it at the state, where Morell was there for 14 years, 15 years, I'm not sure, and they couldn't get that done. So, when we look at it, I do think, I agree that I don't think privatization of any kind of water is a good thing. I believe it needs to stay within the public realm. But I will say I would not be opposed to looking at the billing system and the finance system in terms of figuring out another system, even if breaking it away. Because right now the customer service and the billing is not acceptable. I think we can all agree that we know we have generational neglect at Sewage and Water Board with our infrastructure and our pipes, but when it comes to our billing and basic numbers, that's ridiculous, which is why I've been a huge advocate for AMI billing. And within 3 years, the goal is to have every household doing it so we don't have to rely on estimation. But I think that would be a really good piece to look at to potentially pull off of Sewage and Water Board. So I do think that, I'm sorry, once again, but a minute goes fast here.
You're talking really fast. You're just getting a lot in. Mr. Everson.
When we looked at things like Entergy and trash collection, and I hear people saying they don't think the city can run things, they don't seem to realize that for example, they oppose. People are skeptical of municipalizing our electrical utility because look at how the city screws up trash collection. And they don't realize that trash collection is privatized. And therefore, it's not really a good argument. And in the same way, they think that, well, all the problems with Sewage and Water Board are an example of how the city can't do things, but the city doesn't really run Sewage and Water Board. So I definitely opposed to privatization because what's the saying? Water is life. You can't privatize water. We have to absolutely oppose that. But I do support the idea of municipalizing the water system and getting it under city control and actually having it run by the city of New Orleans.
Yes.
Can I respond?
Senator Morell, yes.
Can I respond to a comment?
Sure.
So the reason why I call the Sewage and Water Board a quasi-state agency is that it actually, in fact, appears both in the state statute and in the city charter. part of the challenge of reforming sewage and water board is that I had to have partners on the council who would commit to charter changes that would mirror state statutes. So I have a partner in Representative Stephanie Hilferty, who's been a perennial champion of sewage and water board reform, and I hope to work with her to make changes both to the charter and the state statute to expand council oversight.
Thank you. And we're going to move to the lightning round. And please keep answers to one word. And we're going to start with Clancy.
Yes, and this goes to Kristen first. On a scale of 8 through...
I have a minute for one word.
No, you don't get a minute. You get one word. Make it count. On a scale of A through F, what grade would you give Mayor Cantrell?
That's so not fair. C.
Mr. Everson?
Oh, B.
Senator Morrell?
C+.
All right, again, one word, please keep your answer to just that. How would you grade Police Superintendent Ferguson? Mr. Everson, start with you.
D.
I
Ms. Morrell?
give him a C+.
Councilmember Palmer?
I'd give him a C.
Okay, I'm going to start with Senator Morrell this time. Should the council allow Entergy New Orleans to merge with Entergy Louisiana? Yes or no?
No.
Not sure.
No.
I think you've already answered this one, but just to get you on the record, should the city allow lateral transfers into NOPD from other law enforcement agencies? And this goes to Kristen first.
Yes.
Can you repeat that?
Should the city allow lateral transfers into NOPD from other law enforcement agencies?
Yes.
Yes.
And something we talked about earlier, should the city get back into the business of collecting municipal trash? Yes or no, Mr. Everson?
Yes.
Kristen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, related topic. Would you push for the return of curbside recycling? Yes or no? Senator Morrell?
Yes.
Mr. Everson?
A moratorium of curbside recycling?
Return of
A return,
curbside.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes. I brought
Yes.
it back after Katrina.
And this goes again to Kristen first. The mayor opposes constitutional amendment number 1 on the November 13th ballot, which deals with centralized sales tax reporting and collections. Do you support or oppose that amendment?
I support it.
Clark?
Oppose.
Support.
Well, do you support or oppose the revised library millage and on the December 11th ballot?
Yes.
Support.
Support.
And final question of the night, do you support or oppose the neighborhood housing fund millage on the same ballot? I'll start with Councilmember.
Yes. I put it there.
Yes.
Support.
Support.
Okay.
Well, that's going to do it for us. I want to thank you guys again very much for coming out and talking about these very important issues with us. Stand by real quick. We're going to move them off stage, and then the ink stain wrenches will come up and do a little bit of wrap up.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, we're back. That was interesting. I guess, give me like your headline out of this.
Well, I think they got into the issues. I really thought there would be more fireworks between them, and there weren't, but that's okay. It's not about showbiz, it's about substance, and I think there were also a couple of questions where, especially Councilmember Palmer, half maybe, going to those, but I think they made their points. I don't think any of them flip-flopped what they said before, and we got into some areas that they hadn't. I think that's the thing.
My first takeaway was from the beginning, and when we asked about Jared Brissett, who, of course, has been making the headlines the last few days with his DWI. We don't know whether he's going to stay in the race. They were, he's got an interesting relationship with both of the people who've been in politics. He's been on the council with Kristen Palmer, and they have come up with this mutual endorsement plan. Basically, if you're not going to vote for me, vote for that one, because they both say that somebody in this role should be someone who comes from a district council seat. Jared Brissett also, as JP Morrell said, has a longstanding relationship with his family, worked for his mother as when she was on the city council. So it was interesting that they really both did not engage on kind of what he should do at this point professionally. They really spoke about him as someone who needs to take care of himself personally. They didn't say whether he should get out of the race or get off the council. Kristen Palmer did not answer, whether this mutual endorsement still stands. I think the takeaway is he's just not a factor anymore, and I think that's correct.
So agreed with both of what my colleagues have to say. I would like to say that I was very interested in their answers when it came to short-term rentals. We all know that the short-term rental ordinance is something that, enforcement rather, of the short-term rental ordinance is something that is questionable for a lot of us here in the community.
And Kristen Palmer is the author of that bill, so
Right.
that's kind of why it's got a little personal.
Yeah, so of course, I knew that she would kind of take the charge on that one, and I know there's a lot of questions on if the ordinance needs to change, because, in which J.P. Morrell did mention that it's an awful ordinance and he thinks it needs to be rewritten. But honestly, I think the question that we have here is short-term rental ordinance, though it's not of course, the reason behind the affordability crisis that's happening in New Orleans. It is a contributing factor. And also the big question we have here, talking about crime in the city. A lot of people are becoming victims, and people who felt that they were untouched by an issue that was happening within the city. This is reaching out all over. So we have a lot of questions about just kind of the consent degree. How many officers do we have? And Mr. Morrell made a point that there is a hiring crisis, not just in the city of New Orleans, but across the nation when it comes to police officers.
And it's interesting that both Councilmember Palmer and former Senator Morrell said that they thought, if I'm correct, they thought that the NOPD is not ready to exit the consent decree.
Yeah.
Well, it does seem to me that on STRs there was a clear difference, I think, between the two of them, but that's kind of it. It's hard to really find an issue where there was
I guess we should say that Councilmember Palmer says that it's the enforcement that's a problem as opposed to the law.
Sure.
Let's just-
Yeah.
But it seems like that's like the big issue where there's
Yeah.
a really stark policy difference between them, and if it comes down to a race of personality, what do you guys think about that? Like who's got the
At some
mojo?
level, a lot of races come down to personality. Because voters don't dive real deep into issues, unfortunately. And it's about messaging. And truth is, I think on a policy level, and in terms of answering the question, and this may sound like a lawyerly or political answer, but I actually think both of them are right. The ordinance doesn't suck, the enforcement sucks. But until you enforce, if they started enforcing the ordinance, maybe they would find out that it does suck. But we don't really know that yet. And I think, but I think Morrell made a point several times where the council needs to, and this is my word, kind of buck up and be more assertive. And he said that across the platform of all the issues, whether it's regulation of Entergy or enforcement of STRs. The city council has the power of the purse. And I think that's a point where Morrell, I think, scored some points, because when people are unhappy, they tend to want change. And so I think he's trying to tap into that by saying, you know, this ordinance doesn't work. I don't think that's entirely correct. It's the enforcement that clearly is lacking, and it's hard to tell if the ordinance works or not. So I don't think Palmer is entirely at fault for writing a bad ordinance. We don't know how good that ordinance is because the administration has sucked at making it work.
I thought there was, you know, a difference emerged over their views on privatization. J.P. Morrell definitely against, Bart Everson definitely against, Kristen Palmer kind of nuanced. When we came to trash, she said, you know, she is, in her district, all 3 companies operate, the one that is failing and the 2 that really are not. And, you know, there is something to be said possibly for privatization, maybe even a little bit of the sewage and water board, not the water and sewer systems, but things like billing, where the public agency has really, really struggled. Maybe privatization might work there. On the other hand,
I got the picture she was thinking maybe outsourcing and not just privatizing it, maybe
Right.
hire an outside contractor,
Right.
just like the city does.
which is what privatization
Yeah, it is in a
really,
way, but I mean, it's not like turning all of it over, and,
Right.
and
With oversight.
the city still
Yes.
has oversight, yeah.
Yes. And then with Entergy, you know, she thought maybe bringing it in-house would allow the city to get some federal money that Entergy can't get for putting the system back together. So I thought it was just a very nuanced view.
Yeah, except for one thing, I'll say this about, I thought Kristen's response on Entergy was not really responsive, in the sense that to municipalize a system takes 10 years. They got to rebuild the system right now. So maybe that's a long-term answer in the future, but there are 60 municipalities in the last 10 years have considered municipalization. And I'm not against municipalization. These are just the facts. 9 of them out of the 60 have municipalized. 2 of them actually went back to private ownership, and the others are struggling invariably. It depends on the size of the city. It depends on a lot of things. You know, but the point is, they didn't really get to the question of, I don't think, that was the question where I was the most dissatisfied with all of their answers. They didn't really say, where's the money? Nobody wants to make the citizens pay for it, which at election time, that's an easy answer, but at the end of the day, it's got to be paid for. If the feds don't pay for it, how are you going to pay for it? None of them answered that.
Sharice, I'm curious to know what you think was the most surprising thing maybe you heard, or the most interesting thing out of all of them.
The most interesting thing was the lack of the answer on civil service.
I love that question. I mean, it's like that's definitely a question I was like, I don't know if they're going to be able to answer this question. That's a great question to ask them.
I think he said, did he say that he didn't know that we had civil service? Possibly?
He said he would have to do some more research.
That was the most
Yeah.
honest answer.
It was.
He just said,
That
"I
was
don't
kind of
know."
a Mr. Smith goes to, you know,
Yeah, and
Perdido
usually
Street.
you expect people to kind of just BS an answer, fake it till you make it, but he was like, look, you got me. I'm done. I've got nothing.
Because
And then
I
Palmer the same
criticized
way.
Councilmember Palmer's answer on energy, I thought her answer, parroting a little bit and building on what Stephanie said, I liked nuanced answers, because these problems are not simple.
No.
If government was simple, we'd have solved it a long time ago. We'd all have great government. It's hard. Government exists to regulate interactions among human beings who are complex creatures. So governing is not simple. And I thought the idea of maybe privatizing billing at the Sewage and Water Board is actually something that I've been thinking about. I wonder if that's an answer. And I've quietly been talking to a couple of council members about it, not Kristen Palmer. But
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that she brought that up. So I thought that was one of the better, more nuanced. Even if it doesn't work, it's worth exploring.
Also,
What they're
another
doing now doesn't work, so.
Oh, no, it's okay. No, I was just saying another answer that kind of caught me, you know, has a lot of people talking, is the consent decree. And several people who agree that it's not time to move forward from it.
Yeah, I was surprised that like all of them pretty much were just like, nah, it's not. We're not in that place right now.
Yeah.
And I think the public would agree with that answer.
Yeah.
Back on one thing that Dave commented very, I thought, authoritatively on the issue of Jared Brissett. I thought they all kind of copped out, frankly. They punted on that question. You know, and I've been one, and I've taken some heat for not kicking Councilmember Brissett. I've said, look, addiction's a disease, and I've had commentaries about that on TV, and people are upset. Others are very happy with it. But tick-tock, tick-tock. It's time for Jared to make a statement about this. He's promised a statement tomorrow, for those of you who are watching this on streaming, tomorrow being Thursday morning. I'm not sure he's going to make that deadline, because we thought there was word earlier today that he was going to give a statement tonight from his campaign, and now it's going to come tomorrow morning. And you know, if he really is serious about recovery, he needs to put recovery first. And I think they could have all said that, and I didn't really hear that in a resounding sort of way.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to do it at that. We are past our time. Thank you guys very, very much for doing this. It was great
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you
Great
very much
job
for watching.
moderating,
Thank you.
John.
Yeah.